A few weeks ago, I introduced a rating system for my sermons. Now, I rate them not on level of appropriateness, nor do I rate them on how good they are, because let's face it, they're all great. But I'm glad you laughed at that. I don't know if that makes me feel better or worse that you laughed at that. But what I've done is I've tried to kind of give you a rating system on how difficult the material is for us to process and understand in order to implement into our life today. And so sometimes I will make it a little more difficult, sometimes I'll make it a little bit easier, and the way that I have demonstrated that to you is using the ski slope guide trail map. You know what I'm talking about? You got the little green trails, the little bunny slopes, right? Those are like the green circles. Then you kind of got the blue squares, and these are a little more difficult. Then I've got what comes ahead of the blue, or the next level from the blue squares is what? The black diamond, and then ultimately what is the top level, the most difficult of all the ski slopes you can ski? The double black diamond. Well, this morning, that's what we're going to be talking about. So if you're not ready for that this morning, be sure you grab one of the worship guides so that you can, draw a little mustache on my face or put a little hair on my head on the picture there in the worship guide. Because we're going to talk about some things that are going to be a little bit deeper than what we normally talk about, okay? And here's how we're going to start that. So are you with me here? We are going to get to the Bible today. We're going to get to John chapter 14 because we're in a series about where Jesus is talking with his disciples and the last time that he spent some time with them. But we're going to get there, but I want to kind of talk some background before that. And here's how we're going to start. This is a double black diamond sermon message, so it's going to be very difficult for you. But here's what I want you to do for me. Are you ready? Are you listening? You're okay now? Okay, here's what I'd like for you to do. I would like for everyone to raise their right hand up into the air. Raise it high into the right air. Okay, now I want you to look around at all the people that are raising their right hand in the air. Now, you may put those down. I want you to think about what just happened. You see, in my mind during the week, I thought I need some kind of illustration for people to understand the difficulty of language. And so I thought in my office that what I would do is I had this idea, this picture in my mind of everybody having their right hand raised. And so what I thought about was that concept. And I thought about how can I communicate that to you. And so my little brain, my itty-bitty mind here, this little IBM that God has given me, I sent that signal to my throat and vocal cords, which somehow is able to take that message that is in my mind and to vibrate my vocal cords in such a way that I send out sound waves out into the audience by use of the sound system that we have. And those sound waves go and they vibrate and they pick up on your two receivers, right? You've got two receivers, most of us do on either side. And the sound that I am making vibrates on the inside of your eardrum, some way, shape, form, or fashion. And then your mind is able to take that input, if you will, this sound wave input, put that in your mind is able to translate that. You thought that was really easy what you did just a moment ago. So it's going to get much tougher from that. That was the easiest thing you're going to get to do. But then your ear takes that and it responds to that. That sends signal to your brain, and then your brain interprets the sound waves and the tenor and the pitch and how they vibrate, and then that sends a signal to your brain out to your arm, and you're able to raise your hand. Now, isn't that an amazing thing? If you really stop and think about that, isn't that an amazing technology that you and I take for granted all the time? Isn't that amazing? I mean, you just really think about that, because language has meaning. It's the first thing you got to understand today, that language has meaning. In fact, language has meaning in multiple ways. Take a look at this. Thank you very much. Now, isn't that amazing? Because, see, the first time, at least something physically was happening. When I'm telling you or asking you to do something, at least there's some sound waves that are vibrating out there, so something physical is happening. But this time, you were just able to look at a screen. You are so well trained. You were able to look at a screen and translate those words, which are just strange images that you and I have agreed upon as some kind of meaning, and then you're able to look at that, interpret that, and respond to that. Isn't that amazing that language has meaning? Because everybody who was playing along with me, I know some of you already quit, I understand that, but everybody else who was playing along read that, and they're able to translate that and lift up their left hand. Isn't that amazing that you and I recognize that language has meaning? These little marks, these little scrapes, whether they're on stone or paper or electronic, all have some meaning. Now notice this one. Some of you are trying to figure that out, right? I mean, you're going like, yeah, okay, touchdown is this, and so a left one must be, no. You read those things, and you know that each one of those has meaning, but you don't understand the meaning, and so even though those are words, you all recognize those words, your brain kind of goes processing, doesn't make sense, just like every other sermon that he's ever preached, doesn't make sense. And you can't comprehend this, even though you understand, recognize the words, and yet there's something that's not quite right in there. Why is that? Because language has meaning, and when you read this, you understand part of the meaning, you understand all of the words, you understand the connection of that, but it doesn't compute because it doesn't make sense, it doesn't have meaning because language has meaning. Now, you and I would recognize that, you and I know that, and we actually, when we're little children, we begin to grow up and try to figure out what this language means, and you see little children that are trying to understand that, and so we spend all of our growing up days trying to give meaning to language, and then yet when you and I get older, we spend all of our time trying to deconstruct language so that language doesn't mean what we think it means anymore. Ever been to the doctor, and the doctor says, you need to lose what? Weight, right? And you interpret that to mean, oh, well, I can eat everything that I've been eating and not change any other my diet or my habits and any kind of thing, and I will lose weight. Is that what we try to make things like that happen, don't we? But you and I know that language has meaning, and even our children understand that. In fact, these two words have meaning. You know the word a or ah, that has a meaning. The word the or the has a meaning. And I want to demonstrate that to you by using nothing more or nothing less than a plate of cookies. Now, Isaiah, I've got you come up here, so you're going to help me with this demonstration. You don't bring his Bible, too. That's good, Isaiah. Thank you. That's all right. And what I've got for you, a little job to do, okay? And what I've got a job for you to do, we got a plate of cookies. Did you have breakfast today? Yeah, okay. Are you still hungry? No. Okay. What, do you think you can find somebody that's hungry for a cookie? Is there anybody out there that might want a cookie? Okay. All right. Yeah. The Pilson family didn't have breakfast today. It looks like us. Everybody in their row just raised their hand. All right, now, Isaiah, here's what I want you to do. I got a plate of cookies. Can you recognize there's different kind of cookies on the plate? Okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take a cookie. Take a cookie. Ooh, went for the blue one. Now, tell me, I don't have a microphone up here. We'll do that for later. But tell me, why in the world did you choose the blue cookie when I said a cookie? Why did you take the blue one?
Because it's a cookie.
Because it is a cookie? Yes, so good. Why did you choose that particular cookie? Because she likes this one. Do you like the blue cookie better because it's pretty? It's got little sprinkles on it. You like sprinkles, right? But you didn't choose any of these cookies. But were you free to choose any of those cookies? When I said A, yeah, he's free to choose any of those cookies, isn't he? But because he likes color and he says blue, that's good for you because blue's a healthy food group, then I'm going to take blue, all right? And so I don't have a napkin, so you get to take that cookie. But here's the question that I want you to take this time. I want you to take the chocolate chip cookie, okay? Now, why did you pick that cookie? Because I told you to, right? Good answer. Is he this good at home? He just does what he's told? No, she says, but that's okay. When I said you can take a cookie, that meant you could take any of the cookies. Isn't that right? But when I told you that you had to take the chocolate chip cookie, could you have taken any of these cookies and still been right? No, you could only take which cookie? The chocolate chip cookie. Very good. Did you know even a child understands this thing? It's you and I that adults don't understand this. Now, you're going to make two friends or one friend, or you're going to have a bellyache, so whatever it is, you can go back to seat. Thank you for that, Isaiah. Either way you want to do that. Thank you, Isaiah. Isn't that amazing that even he understands that the word a and the word the have differences, and they have different in meaning? You probably know this. We define terms for this. We say that a is an indefinite article. And so an indefinite article means that it's not definite, it's not defined, it's not just one. And so when I said to Isaiah, hey, you can take a cookie, that meant for him he could take any of the cookies, because as long as it was a cookie, it was within the realm of what he was supposed to do, right? But except he's a kid, he's going to take the blue cookie. That's the one you always take, right, if you like those cookies. But when I said to him that you must take the chocolate chip cookie, I'm giving him a definition, and I'm using the definite article saying there is only one chocolate chip cookies. We got a snickerdoodle and some M&M cookies on the other side. So the only one that would meet the definition is the chocolate chip cookie. So he didn't have a choice of those things. Does that make sense to you? Do you understand the difference between a cookie and the chocolate chip cookie? Everybody understand? This means yes, this means no. Do you understand? Anybody want a cookie? I have two more cookies. Yeah, that same for you over there. Man, Pilson's, this breakfast. It's the most important meal of the day, Terry. It's you got to feed the kids. And we'll see about that at the end. But why is it then that when we understand the difference between a cookie and the chocolate chip cookie, that when we come to this verse and Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father except through me, that you and I say, well, that's not really exactly what Jesus meant, was it? Isn't it funny how in this world today, even though it's Jesus the one who says that he is the way, the truth, and the life, and that no one comes to the Father except through me, he says, so many people want to do everything they can to deconstruct the language to say, well, that's not exactly what Jesus meant. You got Jesus misunderstood, because there's got to be many other ways instead of just one way, and yet we are beginning to deconstruct language in our culture so that the doesn't mean the anymore, a doesn't mean a anymore, it just means whatever you want it to mean, which when you reach that point in a society, everything in that society begins to break down. Because if you and I cannot agree to a language that you and I can communicate with, that we can have an agreed upon meaning. Remember I said, lift up your right hand, and everybody put what up? Their right hand. If we change the definition of words, then you and I have no understanding of what can possibly be mean, and society cannot continue to exist, because if we do that, every meaning that we put up there then begins subject. In fact, it's already happens in our culture so many times that in Springfield, up until the last few months, they have had to put up cameras to take pictures of cars that go through what kind of lights? Red lights. Why? Because people say, red light, that means you go really, really fast. Is that what we've kind of changed the definition of those things? Or, I think I can make it. And so when you begin to deconstruct things within the culture, it's not going to work, because if everybody begins to disregard what red means, what happens? Accidents, boom, crash, problems, difficulty. And we do the same thing, not only in the culture, but we do the same thing in the Scriptures, because Jesus in John chapter 14, talking with his disciples, the last 11 guys that are left, that are the ones that he's invited to be closest to him in his ministry, he is about to leave them, and he has this whole long conversation. If this is just your first time, you haven't been here for the rest of the series, you'll need to kind of pick that up and kind of read the rest of John chapter 14. Actually beginning in John 13. But we come to this point that Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, because there's a little conversation going on around that, isn't there? John chapter 14, there's a little conversation that's going on around there. And the question is, if I can get to the right verse here, excuse me, I had the wrong sticky note here. On John chapter 14, he is talking, and he's talking about that he is going to prepare a place for you, and he's going to come again, and he says, I will take you. And then Thomas says to him, Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way of where you're going? Now, Jesus is talking about the direction of the way that he's going toward heaven. He is ending his life here, going there to prepare a place for us, and he says, I am doing this. And Thomas asks, I do not know the way. Lord, we do not know where you're going. How can we know the way? And Jesus responds by saying this verse, Thomas, if you're looking the way to the eternal life, to the afterlife, to heaven, I am the way. And I am the truth, and I am the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. Now, I don't know how good you are at deconstructing language and trying to figure out a meaning that is not there, or trying to ignore the plain meaning that is there, but it's very difficult for me, if you look at this passage, to say that Jesus meant anything other than that he is the only way, the one way, the only truth, the only life, and if you expect to get to the Father, to God, the only way to do that is through Jesus. Now, I don't make that claim, you don't make that claim, Jesus makes that claim. But what oftentimes happens in our culture is people begin to deconstruct that. Some people will say, well, no, wait a minute. Maybe Jesus never said this. In fact, maybe what was going on here is that these writers who came after Jesus, maybe they began to create all these things, and so maybe they wrote this down and that Jesus never said these things. In fact, in the 1980s, there was a popular movement called the Jesus Seminar, where these guys with a very liberal bent, beginning to believe in nothing practically, would get together and they would try to decide what they thought Jesus said. And they would do this by having this cute little system of putting these stones in or these tokens or something like that, and they were different colors, and they tried to say, well, Jesus didn't say this, this was somebody else after him, he wrote it down. The problem is that the New Testament is by far the most attested to of our ancient texts. By far. And I can do message upon this. But in order to understand if an ancient document is real or not, or is viable or not, you have to make two decisions. Number one, you have to make the decision on how close a most ancient copy that you have of that document is and the original writing. See, I told you it's going to be a double diamond Sunday, so this is the time you can pick your crayons out and start coloring my face if you want to. But in order to understand how valid a document is, you have to see how close, what's the span of time from the original and then the most recent copy that you and I have. Of most of the ancient documents that you and I take for granted, things like Pliny's understanding of history, whether it is the Iliad and the Odyssey, or any of those documents that you and I believe in or are taught in, most of the time, those documents from the original time it was written to the earliest or the most recent text is about 700 years. So there's a 700-year gap from the first time it was originally written to the copy that we have that's left. Do you know that for most of the New Testament, that time frame is not 700 years, but 100 years? In fact, oftentimes it's even 70 years. And yet so many people will say, well, the Odyssey is correct. We don't ever have any questions about that. But the New Testament we have questions about because we're not sure Jesus ever said that. Well, if we're sure about everything else that had a distance of 700 years, why can we not be sure of a document that is between 100 years? Don't you think that more stories could be made up in 700 years than they could within 60 to 100 years? Don't you think that would be the case? Absolutely. The second understanding is how many copies of that original text you have, or that most ancient copies. Most of the time you look at ancient text and we have 5 or 6 at most copies of these original books that you and I are trained to study in school. We have a few copies, sometimes as few as one copy that we have from a document that you and I take to be real. When you come to the New Testament, we have hundreds of copies that are within that 150-year time frame. In fact, we have thousands of copies. And so it's very difficult for anybody who understands any of these things. Now, the guy on National Geographic can confuse Christians who don't know any better. But if you know better, you know that the New Testament is one of the most well-attested, in fact, by far the most best attested of the ancient text. So to say that, well, Jesus never said this is to ignore all the facts that science and history produce. Number two, some people will say, well, Jesus said this, and he was wrong, and he knew it. Now, if Jesus was wrong and he knew it, is he somebody that you and I can trust? No. In fact, we call people who know one thing and say something else. No, we don't call them politicians. We call them what? We call them liars, right? Because if you intend to deceive me by what you say, then you are being deceitful and you are a liar and we can't trust you. Now, most people today will not argue point number one, or they won't argue point number two, because neither one of those makes sense. What people will do today is they will argue point number three, and they will say something like this, that Jesus was wrong, but he didn't know it. Okay, this is a very popular idea out there, and that Jesus was wrong about being the only way, because language has meaning, and Jesus, by the way, also in the Greek language, there's the definite article of the way, the truth, the life. Each one of those is in there. And so sometimes people will say that, well, Jesus was wrong, but he didn't know it. Have you ever said something that you were wrong about, but you didn't know that you were wrong? Has that ever happened to you? Sometimes it does. Now, are you guilty because you passed on information that you didn't verify? Well, maybe, but you're not quite a liar, because as best you understood, you told the truth. So the worst that can be said about you is that you were misguided. And some people will say this. They will say that Jesus told us what he knew, but the Father had another way, and he didn't tell Jesus that. Because there's got to be other ways, right? There just can't be just one way, because that would be so narrow, that'd be so restrictive. So there's got to be other ways that Jesus didn't know that, but God has all these other ways, and Jesus said that was true. Now, that sounds pretty plausible until you really begin to think about it. And in fact, I was thinking about that, and I was trying to figure out how to explain all of that to you. And I know what you're thinking is the same thing that I was thinking. In order to explain that to you, that I need to talk about Gilligan's Island. I know that's what you were thinking. Because the same way of understanding this is with Gilligan's Island. How many of you remember Gilligan's Island? You remember, right? You know, there was the professor and Marianne and all the rest of them, right? And so there were this crew, and they were on this 3-hour tour, and they got, the ship was wrecked, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And so this crew, although they can make great houses out of bamboo, and they can actually make cars out of bamboo, they can't figure out how to make a raft to get off the island, right? And so what happens is, every week there's an opportunity for them to get off the island, but what happens? You're right. Gilligan messes it up every week. It's the same thing over and over and over and over again. So here's what I was thinking about when I was thinking about maybe that that God knew another way and Jesus didn't know it. Well, suppose that Gilligan, in fact, sold me the island, and I turned it into Nilligan's Island, okay? So let's just say that happened, all right? So we have Nilligan's Island, and then I have brought you here on Nilligan's Island, and we're all here together, and I talked to Gilligan and say, hey, I'm going to buy this island, and I'm going to make it kind of a tourist location, and so I'm going to bring people in, and I asked him about how safe the island is. He said, oh, yeah, man, this island is safe. There's never any problems here. And I say, well, is there any emergency way off of the island in case something bad happens? He said, no, there's no emergency way off the island. Once you get on the island, you're stuck. We've been here for like 60 years now, and so there's no way off this island, so if something happens, you're in trouble. There's no other way off. And I say, are you sure there's no other way off? And yes, Gilligan says, yes, there's no other way off. So I said, okay, we'll just make sure that we're always prepared. And so I bring you by plane. No, wait a minute, that's a different 1970s show. But I bring you in by plane to our island here, to Nilligan's Island, and you and I are having a great time on this island. Everything is great until all of a sudden, in the middle of the island, a volcano appears. Now, seems a little strange, but this happened every week on Gilligan's Island. And so this volcano appears. The plane has left us here. The plane has taken off and has gone away. The volcano shakes the island, and it breaks our radio, and we have no way to contact the plane to come back and pick us up. That's what happens to us. Yeah, we're in syndication for the rest of our life. No. What happens is that we die on this island, and then we get to heaven, and somehow Gilligan is there, and we say to Gilligan, this was a horrible thing. Why didn't you provide any other way on the island? And Gilligan says, oh, now wait a minute. I didn't tell you, but there was a boat on the other side of the island, and a volcano-proof container that you could have gotten in that boat and gotten off the island. Now, let me ask you, what would you think about me for not knowing that? Would you have been a little upset with me for not knowing that? A little bit, but if I had done everything that I could do, you wouldn't be so mad as me, but you'd be mad at who? Gilligan. Because Gilligan knew of another way off this island, but he did not tell us. You wouldn't really feel good about Gilligan, would you? Well, what if God told Jesus, yeah, there's no other way, but then, oh yeah, by the way, I've got other ways that you can get off this island. What would you think about God then? Is that fair to us to have been told there was another way off of this island, but God never told us about it? He didn't give Jesus that information? Would that not look bad upon God? In fact, what do you think the Son would think of the Father if there was another way off the island? What did Jesus ask God in the garden? He said, if there's any other way, please let this not happen. If there's some other way to do this, let this cup, what? Pass. And so if there really was another way, and if Jesus really didn't have to do what he was supposed to do, then at best you could call that child abuse. The Father would kill the Son for our benefit when there's other ways. You see, people out there in our culture today want us to say that that would be something that would be okay, when in fact that would be evil. See, the real question, though, is not why did not God make many ways off the island? The real question is, why did God make a way at all for us? See, people want to say, well, that may be one way, but why didn't he give us 14 ways? Wasn't it so important that he would give us another way off? No, the real question is, why would God give us any way off? You see, God created man, and he made man perfect, and he put him in a perfect environment, and all he said was, don't eat of this tree. You can eat of any other tree that you want to, but just don't eat off of this one. Anything else you want to is great, just not this one. And what do? We go for that one. And because of that, all of his creation is now fallen, and there's damage done to all of these things, and everything in this entire world is messed up. And every time that he asks us to come back and says, if you would just return to me, if you would just repent, turn from your sin, and come to me, then I will receive you. And so many times we continue to turn that away. So much so that what God did is he did something extraordinary. After he didn't give us that one location, what he did is he raised up a people. And he called out a particular group of people and said, you are to be holy and different than everybody else so that you will be a perfect example and you can be missionaries and tell everyone else in the world. And yet, what did that people do? Time and time and time again, instead of having the relationship with God directly, they chose to substitute that by worshiping the strangest of things. They built a bull out of gold, and they bowed down to that. They decided, well, we don't like being different than everybody else. We want to be just like them. And so they adopted all of these other ways. And God, from time to time, would call them back, bring them back, and they would continue to turn their own way. In fact, God would send prophets, people who had unique connection to him, that would come and bring a message and say, hey, God wants you to come back home. You're messing up. And what did the people do? They sometimes ignored the prophets, and then sometimes they downright killed them. And so God said, well, I know what I'll do. I will send my very own son. Maybe they will respect and honor my own son. And so he sent his son here to proclaim his ways. And what did they do with him? They mocked him. And they ignored him. And they killed him. And yet God even forgave that. And said, even though you've killed my son, if you will just honor him, then I will forgive your sin and you can be in right relationship with me. Is that so crazy? Is that so wrong that he made any way at all? All he asked that we might honor his one and only son, the son, who claims to be the way, the truth, the life. And you and I want to sit around and say, well, that's too narrow. Why can't you give us many other ways? And the question is, why did God make a way at all? So our only real option is this, and that Jesus was right. It's the only thing that's logical. So you can't be another religion and say, oh, we like Jesus. Jesus was really smart. Jesus was a good guy. He was a good teacher. That is not a possibility because he claimed to be God and the only way to get to heaven. And either he was wrong and he knew it, he was a liar, or he was wrong and he didn't know it and that makes God the liar, or he's right. Now, I know on a Sunday morning at 8 o'clock, most of the people that would come in this room would say, yeah, Neil, that's a waste of time because I believe in all of that. I believe in number 4. Why do we go talk about 1, 2, 3, and 4? Well, if you believe number 4, then you got to understand that if, in fact, Jesus is the only way, that has some ramifications for us. No one has said this any better than what C.S. Lewis when he said, Christianity is a statement which, if false, is of no importance. And if it is true, it is of infinite importance. The one thing it cannot be is moderately important. And if there's anything that we have done in our culture today, as believers who believe in number 4, we have just made this moderately important. We have made it just another thing to do throughout the week. It's just something else we add to our schedule. It's something that is nice to have, but it doesn't all consume us. It doesn't change the way that we approach life. And it allows us to vote one way and live another way. It allows us to earn money one way and live a different way on Sunday. We have disconnected Sunday mornings from the rest of our existence, making what Christ said moderately important. Is Jesus really the only way? If he is, he demands all. Are you giving him all this morning? Are you in right relationship with him? Are you doing what he has asked you to do? Because if he is the one and only way, it makes a huge difference if Christ really is the Messiah. It affects every aspect of our being, every direction that we look, everything that we do or think. Maybe today you're not convinced. You've not made the decision. Maybe today, Dave, this is the time that you should. Maybe you know these things, but you are finding yourself slipping away because the whole stream of life takes us in one direction. The one thing that your belief cannot be is moderately important.